My name's Caleb Morton. I'm 51 years old, and for most of my adult life, I believed I had things pretty well figured out. I wasn't a flashy guy. I never chased status or cared much for appearances. My life was built on the slow, steady stacking of days, routine, predictable, and, for a long time, enough. For the past 28 years, I was married to Laura. We met in college freshman orientation, actually. She had a sketchbook in her lap and a pencil behind her ear, and I remember thinking, she looks like she sees things the rest of us miss. I guess I was right. Laura became the heartbeat of my life, even if she never beat in time with mine. We built a home in Colorado Springs, 3 bedrooms, hardwood floors, backyard facing the foothills. The kind of place you drive by and think, they've got it together. We raised one son, Dylan. He's 25 now, living in Denver, working in software development and trying to convince me to upgrade my phone every time we talk. I worked in risk assessment for a major insurance firm. 40, sometimes 50 hours a week, looking at numbers, reading reports, forecasting worst-case scenarios. That was my job, spot the trouble before it happens. It's ironic, really, how good I was at doing that for strangers, yet completely blind when it came to the person sitting across from me every night at dinner. Laura taught art history at the local college. She loved it. At least, she used to. Over time, she started coming home quieter. Not tired, just distant. At first, I chalked it up to stress, tight budgets, curriculum changes, faculty politics. But in hindsight, that wasn't it. Something had started to shift, and I was too locked into my own routine to see it clearly. It all started to unravel on a Thursday in late April. I'd had a meeting canceled last minute, an out-of-town client called off due to a family emergency. I could have stayed at the office and caught up on paperwork, but the sun was out, and for once, I felt like doing something impulsive. I stopped by the Thai place Laura liked, the one on Cascade with the rickety patio and K***lure dumplings, and decided to surprise her at home. She was supposed to be on campus until 4. That's what she told me the night before. But when I pulled into the driveway just after 1, her car was already in the garage. I sat there for a second, engine idling, my hands still on the gearshift. Maybe she came homesick? Or forgot something? I didn't feel suspicious, just curious. I stepped inside through the back door. The kitchen was quiet, sun pouring in through the big window above the sink. I could hear the faint hum of a laptop fan and the occasional clack of keyboard keys. Laura was at the table, hunched slightly forward, eyes glued to her screen. She didn't notice me at first. I said her name softly. She jumped and slammed the laptop shut in one motion. Too fast. Too deliberate. The kind of move you make when you don't want someone seeing what was just there. I froze for a split second. So did she. Then her expression rearranged itself, calm, casual, like I hadn't just watched her panic. "You're home early," she said, voice a little too light. "Meeting got canceled," I replied. "Thought I'd surprise you." I held up the takeout bag as proof of my good intentions. She smiled, but there was something off about it, like she was performing the emotion rather than feeling it. "I didn't expect you," she said, standing and smoothing out the front of her shirt. "Clearly," I said with a chuckle, trying to keep things light. But I couldn't stop thinking about that screen. Just before it went black, I caught something. A photo. Blurry, but my brain locked onto it like it had been seared into the back of my eyelids. Laura in a swimsuit, something blue and halter-topped, from what I could tell. She was on a beach, smiling, arms around a man I didn't recognize. He was shirtless, tan, and the way they stood together, it didn't read like a group **T. It read like an *Macy. Like comfort. Like a memory shared between two people with no reason to hide. "You okay?" I asked, trying to keep my tone level. She nodded. "Yeah. Just startled me, that's all. Didn't expect company." "What were you working on?" I asked, casually motioning to the laptop. She hesitated. Just for a breath. Then she said, "Just grading. Student presentations. You know, the usual." She walked over to the fridge and grabbed a bottle of water, cracking it open and taking a long sip. I watched her hands. They were shaking. Not a lot, but enough. I took a seat across from where she had been. "Set the food down between us." "Seemed like you were looking at photos," I said. She glanced at the laptop, then at me. Her mouth twitched into something almost like a smirk. "Oh, that. One of my students sent me some pictures from a study abroad trip I led a few years back. Nostalgic stuff." "Didn't know your trips involved beach vacations," I said lightly, but there was an edge to it. One I didn't mean to let out. She froze for half a second. "It was a stopover in Greece. Nothing fancy. That guy was another chaperone. Married. Completely innocent." I nodded slowly, pretending to accept it. But something inside me had already shifted. It wasn't the photo that unsettled me, not really. It was the look on her face before she saw me, the way her eyes had softened at the screen, her body language relaxed. I knew that version of her. I used to be the reason she looked like that. And now I was a surprise, a disruption. We ate lunch together, mostly in silence. She asked about my meeting, I asked about her classes. We passed the soy sauce back and forth like nothing had happened. But under the surface, everything was different. That night, after she went to bed, I sat alone in the living room with the TV off and the lights dimmed. I thought about how many times I'd walked into that kitchen, that house, that marriage, and not seen what was right in front of me. Laura had been different for months. Maybe longer. She'd started using new skincare products, going to Pilates, signing up for weekend retreats in places I'd never been invited to. She said she was taking care of herself, and I believed her. Because I wanted to. Because it was easier than asking hard questions and hearing answers I didn't want. Now I couldn't stop the questions from forming. Who was the man in the photo? Was it really an old memory, or something newer, something ongoing? Had she lied to my face, or was I just seeing ghosts in the pixels? I thought about waking her up, demanding the laptop, scrolling through every photo until I found the truth. But I didn't. Not because I was afraid of the answer, but because I already knew it. I just didn't know what to do with it yet. That night, I didn't sleep. I laid there in the dark, staring at the ceiling while Laura breathed steadily beside me, unaware or pretending to be. Her back was turned and I stayed frozen on my side of the bed, a rigid statue wrapped in sheets that suddenly felt foreign. I couldn't bring myself to look at her. I kept thinking about that image on her laptop, how she'd shut it like it was a reflex. Like I'd caught her doing something she shouldn't. That kind of reaction doesn't come from nostalgia. It comes from guilt. At some point, I got up and wandered the house. Just walked through the quiet, trying to settle the storm inside my chest. The hallway light was still on. She always left it for Dylan, even though he hadn't lived with us for years. A habit she never broke. Funny what sticks. I ended up in the kitchen again, same spot where she'd sat hours earlier, same faint outline of the laptop still pressed into the tables with grain. I poured a glass of water I didn't want and tried to trace back the signs. Turns out they were everywhere. It started with her phone, always face down. Always locked. Laura used to forget where she left the damn thing half the time, but now it was practically an extension of her hand. She took it with her to the bathroom, to the laundry room, even out into the backyard when watering the plants. The screen never lit up when I was nearby. Notifications were silenced, texts cleared out. I'd notice her smiling at messages she never mentioned, and when I asked about it, she'd say it was from group chats or faculty gossip. Things I'd supposedly find boring. And then there were the retreats. About a year ago, she'd started going on these weekend getaways. Sometimes with faculty, sometimes with her art collective, a group I'd never met, never heard her talk about before, and never saw her bring around. They'd head off to places like Santa Fe, Taos, Sedona. Always somewhere scenic, always out of reach. She said they were workshops. Healing spaces. A way to reconnect with the creative self. I'd offered to come once. She laughed. That laugh, it was light and warm on the surface, but there was something hollow underneath. Like I'd said something childish. Something ridiculous. She said the retreats were just for women and that I'd hate it. That I'd get bored. That I wouldn't understand. And maybe she was right. Maybe I wouldn't have understood. But the thing is, when someone stops inviting you into their world, they're not just protecting their space. They're building a life where you don't belong. That realization hit me like a slow-moving freight train. I didn't even notice it at first. It wasn't some dramatic moment of discovery. It was a series of little changes I ignored because I trusted her, because I wanted to believe we were still us. She'd changed her skincare. Nothing major, but enough that I noticed the bottles in the bathroom had different labels, French ones, expensive. She started using essential oils at night, claiming they helped her sleep. I didn't argue. Hell, I even liked the lavender. But then came the yoga mats, the boutique gym memberships, the new wardrobe that didn't quite match her usual style. Crop tops, high-waisted leggings, sleek boots I'd never seen her wear before. She said it was self-care. She said turning 50 had shaken something loose and that she just wanted to feel good in her skin again. Who was I to argue with that? But now I saw it differently. Not as a transformation, but as a transition. A version of herself I no longer recognized. A version that was moving further away from me with every protein shake and Pilates class. Even Dylan had noticed. About 6 months ago, he and I were having lunch, just the two of us, at this burger joint halfway between our places. He was mid-bite when he said, "Is everything okay with you and Mom?" I remember freezing, fries halfway to my mouth. "What do you mean?" He shrugged, tried to play it off. "I don't know. She just seems off. Distant, maybe?" She doesn't return my texts like she used to. She's just busy, I said, brushing it off. You know how she gets when finals are coming up. But he looked unconvinced. Okay. Just checking. I didn't think much of it at the time. But now? That question had claws. It sunk deep. Our son had seen what I hadn't, or maybe what I refused to. When I finally crawled back into bed around 4 in the morning, I didn't sleep. I just stared at the sliver of moonlight falling across our carpet and listened to the soft whir of her breathing. I couldn't remember the last time I'd reached for her in the dark, or the last time she'd reached for me. We had become strangers who shared a mortgage. That morning she acted like nothing had happened. She kissed me on the cheek, grabbed her travel mug, and headed off to work like she hadn't shut her laptop like it was radioactive. I watched her drive away from the front window. She was humming something, tapping the steering wheel, smiling to herself. Whatever guilt she had, it wasn't slowing her down. I spent the next few hours in a fog. Sat on the back porch with coffee gone cold, watching squirrels fight over seeds in the bird feeder. I tried to tell myself I was overthinking, that I was projecting, that maybe I was the problem, too boring, too predictable, too old. But then I remembered something else. A moment I hadn't thought about in months. Last December, just before Christmas, she came back from one of those retreats. She was glowing. Not just happy radiant. Her skin flushed, her smile easy, her laughter constant. I made a joke about how it must have been a really good workshop. She said it was transformational. That word stuck with me. Transformational. Like something inside her had turned over. She spent the next 2 weeks cleaning, reorganizing, giving things away. She called it clearing space. I thought it was about the house. Now I wonder if it was about me. That day, I didn't go into the office. I called in sick, something I hadn't done in years. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table, same spot she'd been in the day before, and stared at the empty chair across from me. My mind kept circling around one question: what else was I missing? When someone you trust starts lying, it doesn't just damage your faith in them. It breaks something inside your own mind. You start doubting your memory, your instincts. Every moment becomes suspect. Every smile, every absence, every locked screen. I told myself I wasn't going to snoop, that I was above that. But by late afternoon, I found myself in our shared office, standing in front of her bookshelf. She kept old journals there. Art lesson plans. Travel itineraries. It wasn't a secret space, it was just hers. But I suddenly felt like a trespasser. I didn't open anything. Not yet. I just stood there, looking. And that's when I noticed something odd. There was a photo missing. A small silver frame that usually sat on the middle shelf, it was gone. It had held a picture of us in New Mexico years ago. We were standing in front of some adobe ruins, arms around each other, squinting in the sun. It wasn't a great photo, but she liked it. Said it made her look tall. It had been there just last week. In its place now was a ceramic bowl filled with polished stones. Pretty. Meaningless. I didn't ask her about it that night. I didn't bring up the laptop or the missing photo or the way my gut felt like a fist wrapped tight around itself. Instead, I smiled when she walked in. I asked how her day was. I listened as she told me about a guest lecturer she wanted to bring in for the spring semester. And I watched the way her eyes flicked toward her phone every time it buzzed. 2 days after the laptop incident, Laura told me she had an art exhibition to attend in Sedona. It came up over breakfast, slid casually between bites of toast, and a review of the weather. I was stirring my coffee when she said it like it was just another Thursday. It's that faculty-sponsored thing, remember? I'll be gone for the weekend. Flying out Friday morning, back Sunday night. She said it while scrolling her phone, not bothering to meet my eyes. I waited a beat. Sedona again? She nodded. Same venue as last year. They invited me to speak on the integration of Western and Native American art forms. Should be a good panel. I said nothing at first, just studied her face. She looked up finally when the silence stretched too long. What? I shrugged. Nothing. Just, you've been traveling a lot lately. She smiled thinly. Part of the job, babe. You know that. And I didn't know that. At least, I thought I did. I told her I had meetings stacked all weekend, that I'd be buried in work. She seemed relieved. Maybe too relieved. Kissed me on the cheek Friday morning, suitcase in hand, and vanished down the driveway like she was heading off to change the world or maybe just escape it. But I didn't go to work. I watched her leave, then packed a bag and followed. I knew it was a risk. I'm not built for this kind of thing, sneaking, spying, the cloak and dagger life. But I couldn't live in that limbo anymore. I needed truth, no matter how much it hurt. I needed something concrete to tear through the fog. She flew from Colorado Springs to Phoenix, then drove the rest of the way in a rental. I stayed a step behind, playing the part of the invisible man. It felt like something out of a movie, one I never wanted to be cast in. When she pulled into the parking lot of a boutique hotel just outside Sedona's main strip, my stomach twisted. It was the kind of place with private patios and desert views, built more for couples than conference-goers. I parked across the street, tucked into the lot of a dusty coffee shop that doubled as a gallery. The kind of place with overpriced cappuccinos and cacti on every table. I ordered something I didn't drink and sat by the window waiting. And that's when he appeared. Same man from the photo. I recognized him immediately, the tan, the lean build, the easy confidence in his walk. He came out of the lobby just minutes after her, wearing sunglasses and a linen shirt unbuttoned one notch too far. He wasn't faculty. He wasn't a chaperone. He was him. Laura stepped out next. Different clothes than she'd worn to the airport, lighter, more relaxed. Something about the way she moved beside him made my throat tighten. Like they'd done this 100 times before. They didn't see me. Or maybe they just didn't look. They walked across the parking lot, hand in hand. Not clumsy or secretive. Natural. Like it belonged that way. At one point, he touched the small of her back and she leaned in, laughing at something he said. It was the kind of laughter I hadn't heard from her in years. And it wasn't mine anymore. That moment, frozen behind a window smeared with fingerprints and afternoon sun, was the truth I'd been avoiding. It hit harder than I thought it would. Not rage. Not devastation. Just this deep, dull ache, like a string pulled too tight in my chest had finally snapped. I took a photo. Just one. Not for revenge. Not for leverage. Just so I wouldn't try to convince myself later that it had been a dream. That I hadn't seen what I'd seen. I sat in my rental car for a long time after that. No tears. No outburst. Just silence. That kind of hollow silence where even your thoughts are scared to speak. I didn't confront her. I didn't march over to the hotel and demand an explanation. There was nothing left to ask. She'd already answered everything with her hands, with her eyes, with the way she didn't even look over her shoulder. Instead, I drove home. 10 hours on the road with nothing but desert, static-filled radio, and my own unraveling. I passed through towns I didn't know the names of, ignored every call that came through, and didn't stop until I pulled into our driveway sometime around 3 a.m. The house looked different. Not physically, but in how it felt. Every room was soaked in betrayal now, like the walls themselves knew and couldn't keep the secret anymore. I didn't rage through her drawers or smash dishes like a man undone. I was too far past that. I moved with quiet purpose, packing a duffel bag with the things I needed most: clothes, toiletries, documents. I grabbed cash from the safe and tucked away my passport. Not because I planned on running far, but because I didn't know what else to do. The last thing I did before I left was write nothing. No letter. No voicemail. No text. Nothing. I left the photo in a drawer beneath the silverware. I figured if she went looking for spoons, she'd find the truth. We all eat with different appetites, I guess. I drove through the sleeping city with no destination. Ended up in a rest stop somewhere north, sleeping upright in the front seat with the engine off and a hoodie bunched under my head. When I woke, my phone had 16 missed calls. All from her. None of them answered. I spent the next few days off-grid. No work. No contact with Dylan. Just me and the cold clarity of being completely, painfully awake. It was like stepping out of a long, bad dream and realizing the monster had been beside you in bed the whole time. Eventually, I found a small motel off the interstate and paid cash for a week's stay. I needed time to think. To breathe. To figure out who I was without her in the frame. I still didn't know what to call what I felt. Was it grief? Anger? Shame? It was probably all of them. But the thing that surprised me most wasn't how angry I was, it was how calm. How quiet the world became once the pretending stopped. It was like I'd been holding my breath for years without realizing it. I started journaling. Nothing fancy, just a cheap notebook and the stub of a pencil I found in the glove box. I wrote everything, what I'd seen, what I'd felt, what I'd suspected long before Sedona. Some of it sounded petty. Some of it sounded like poetry. But all of it was mine. I wrote letters to Dylan that I didn't send. Not yet. I wasn't ready to explain why I'd disappeared. I didn't want him to hate her. Or me. Or both. I didn't know what I was doing next, but I knew I wasn't going back. Laura would return home Sunday night to a quiet house, an open drawer, and the echo of something closing behind me. I didn't want revenge. I wanted freedom. And for the first time in a long time, I was willing to do what it took to find it. I crossed the state line into Idaho under a gray sky, the kind that feels like it's holding back a storm but never commits. The kind that mirrors the quiet mess inside your chest, heavy, full, waiting. I didn't plan to end up in Ashton Lake. I didn't even know it existed until I pulled off the highway to get gas and saw the sign, "Welcome to Ashton Lake, population 4037. There was something about it unassuming, surrounded by thick woods and flanked by a wide, unmoving lake that made me pull off and stay. I found a cabin for rent half a mile off the main road. Nothing fancy. One bedroom, slanted roof, wood-paneled walls that smelled like dust and pine. There was a rusted-out grill on the porch, a collapsed dock out back, and a view of the water through a mess of trees that hadn't been trimmed in years. It was perfect. When the landlord asked for my name, I hesitated for half a second too long. "Mason," I said. "Mason Carter." He nodded, scribbled it on the form, and didn't ask questions. It struck me how easy it was to disappear in America, how all it took was cash, a made-up last name, and a town too small to care. The first morning in the cabin was silent, like someone had turned down the volume on the world. No TV, no buzz of phone notifications, no hum of Laura's laptop from the kitchen. Just wind, water, and the occasional cry of some bird I didn't know the name of. I woke up at 6:17 a.m. without an alarm, the same way I had for years. My body still thought it had somewhere to be. I made coffee with the small machine left behind by the last tenant. It tasted like cardboard, but I drank it anyway. It was hot and bitter and grounding. Later that day, I walked into town and found a flyer at the hardware store. "Looking for help? Call Walt." "No BS. Pays in cash." I called. Walt answered with a grunt. I said I could handle tools, odd jobs, whatever needed doing. He told me to meet him behind the feed store in 20 minutes. That's how I got my first job in Ashton Lake, patching fences, painting sheds, fixing gutters on cabins older than the both of us combined. It was simple work. Work that left your hands sore and your back aching. Work that didn't require spreadsheets or small talk over stale office coffee. I liked it more than I expected. Walt didn't ask questions. Neither did the others. I told them I was from Nevada, divorced, needed a fresh start. That story was close enough to true it didn't feel like lying. Around here, people respected silence. If you didn't ask about their business, they didn't ask about yours. At night, I'd sit out by the water and just listen. To the crickets. To the creak of the trees. To the soft lapping of waves against the broken dock. It was the kind of quiet that could break a man or save him. I didn't know which one it was doing to me yet. Behind the cabin, half buried in a tangle of weeds and half collapsed under a tarp, I found an old boat engine. A Johnson 25. Rusted out and forgotten. I dragged it into the shed, set it up on a workbench, and started fixing it. Slowly, piece by piece, like I was trying to fix myself in parallel. It gave my hands something to do when my mind got loud. Sometimes I'd open my notebook and try to write, but the words didn't come as easily anymore. I didn't want to write about her. About the man in the photo. About the way she kissed me goodbye without a hint of hesitation. That kind of hurt goes too deep for clean sentences. One night, about 2 weeks in, I stood at the edge of the lake just before dawn. Mist curled off the water like smoke. I looked out at the stillness and realized I hadn't spoken to anyone I knew in 17 days. Not Dylan. Not anyone from work. Certainly not Laura. I missed him. Dylan, I mean. I had drafted a dozen texts but never sent them. "Hey, bud. Hope work's going okay. Let's catch up soon. Sorry for the silence. I'm just figuring some things out." But how do you explain to your grown son that you walked away from everything because you couldn't bear the sound of your own life anymore? How do you tell him that the person he grew up with, the version of his mother he trusted, was a ghost wrapped in good intentions and better lies? He deserved better than half answers and blurry truths. So I stayed silent. Instead, I threw myself into the work. I patched up rotting docks, built new steps for a widow named Ruthie who paid me in pie and old stories, and helped Walt re-roof a barn that leaned a little more every time the wind blew. By the end of the third week, I had calluses on both hands and a farmer's tan that made me look like I'd been born in these woods. I started to learn the names of the locals. Not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't help it. Ruthie. Todd. The gas station twins who weren't twins but acted like it. And Clara, the barista at the cafe on Main who always had a book under the counter and a way of looking at you like she saw straight through the noise. But I kept my distance. Always. They called me Mason. And I let them. I didn't miss Laura in the traditional sense. I didn't ache for her voice or long to hold her hand. What I missed was more abstract, like missing the outline of a life. I missed the illusion of being part of something solid. Of having someone in your corner even if they weren't really there anymore. I didn't cry. Not once. But I did start waking up in the middle of the night with the sheets twisted around me and the echo of her laugh in my head, except it wasn't for me anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. I tried not to think about where she was, or who she was with. But sometimes I'd see couples in town, an old man holding open the car door for his wife, a young couple sharing earbuds and coffee, and something in my chest would twist. Not jealousy, just recognition. I used to be that man. Once. By the end of the first month, the engine was mostly back together. I'd taken my time, cleaned it down to the bolts, replaced seals, scraped off rust, rewired the ignition. It still wouldn't start, but I didn't mind. Some things take longer than you expect. And anyway, not everything broken needs to be fixed right away. One night, after finishing a job out near the county line, I stood under a sky so clear I could see every constellation I'd forgotten the names of. I leaned against my truck and exhaled slow, like I was finally releasing something I'd been holding onto since Sedona. That was the first night I let myself think about forgiveness. Not for her. Not yet. But for myself. I didn't leave because I was weak. I left because I knew staying would turn me into someone I didn't want to become, someone bitter, suspicious, small. I left because I couldn't bear the quiet contempt that had started to settle into our conversations like dust on furniture. I left because I wanted to remember who I was before I became a husband who got left behind. Now, in a town where no one knew my name, I was starting to. 7 months passed like that, quiet, unremarkable, and strangely healing. The days bled into each other. Coffee at dawn. Work until sunset. A hot shower, sometimes cold if the water heater threw a fit. Then silence. A stillness that used to scare me but now felt like armor. In Ashton Lake, people didn't pry. They waved, they nodded, and they moved on. I never had to explain where I'd come from or why I carried silence like it was welded to my skin. I still went by Mason. Mason Carter, the quiet guy who fixed roofs and didn't say much. I'd become someone else not through reinvention but by subtraction. I had stripped everything away until there was just me and the echo of my choices. And for a time, that was enough. I kept working for Walt and took on more solo jobs, fences, boat repairs, even a little carpentry. Word spread fast in a town this size. People respected the way I didn't ask questions. They called me reliable. Solid. Ironic, really, given how much of me still felt splintered inside. Every so often I'd drive out to the overlook at the far end of the lake. It was where the road ended, and beyond that, just miles of dense pine. I'd sit there on the hood of my truck, thermos in hand, and think about Dylan. About what he might be doing. If he still thought about me. If he hated me a little more each day for disappearing. But I couldn't bring myself to call. What would I say? Hey son, sorry I vanished. Turns out your mom wasn't just grading papers on her laptop. There's no greeting card for that kind of reunion. Still, something in me stirred each time I sat by that lake. Something small and restless. Like a part of me knew the silence couldn't last forever. And then, one morning, it didn't. It was early March. Snow still clung to the edges of the trees, though the air had beg asterisk and to shift, less bite, more thaw. I walked the mile down the gravel road to check the mailbox the way I did every few days. Usually, it was just local flyers, utility bills, or nothing at all. But this time, there was a single envelope. No return address. But I knew the handwriting before I even touched it. Laura. My hands went cold despite the spring sun warming the back of my neck. The envelope was off-white. A little worn. Like it had been handled too many times before being sent. I turned it over twice in my hand before slipping it into my coat pocket and walking back to the cabin. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I made coffee. Fed the birds. Sat on the steps until the mug was empty and the wind stopped feeling like a blade against my face. Then I opened it. It wasn't long. Just 2 pages. Neatly written in her hand, the same handwriting that had once left sticky notes on my steering wheel or reminders taped to the fridge. That used to be love. Now it was something else. A post-mortem, maybe? She wrote that she had found me. Not out of malice, she said, but necessity. She didn't hire a PI, didn't go full noir. She used the bank card we still shared, a forgotten joint account I hadn't closed. Then a friend of a friend in law circles filled in the blanks. I'm not coming to ask for forgiveness, she wrote. I know I've forfeited the right to that. She admitted the affair had ended months ago. That it fizzled like things built on fantasy often do. She didn't sugarcoat it. He was never going to leave his wife. And I wouldn't have wanted him if he did. She talked about the house, how it was too quiet now. How every room echoed differently. Said she hadn't been sleeping. That the silence had finally caught up to her. She said Dylan barely spoke to her anymore. That he'd asked her once, what did you think would happen? And she hadn't had an answer. The letter didn't blame me. That was maybe the most shocking part. No sideways digs. No, we both grew apart. Just ownership. Honest, brutal. I made a choice, she wrote. And I kept making it. Over and over. Until you didn't give me the chance to anymore. The final paragraph was short. A single request. She was coming to Ashton Lake. She'd booked 3 nights at the Birchwood Inn, room 8. Said she just wanted one conversation. One goodbye in person. Said if I didn't show, she'd leave and I'd never hear from her again. No second letters. No visits. Just gone. She'd be arriving Tuesday. It was Sunday. I read the letter twice more that day. Then I burned it in the fire pit out back. Not out of rage, but out of some strange instinct. Like if I didn't, it would linger in the cabin, haunting the walls. That night, I didn't sleep. Not from anxiety. Not from dread. But because I didn't know what the right thing was anymore. Seeing her again, it felt like opening a door I'd nailed shut. And yet, some part of me buried deep, almost resentfully, wanted to know what she'd say face to face. Without email. Without phone static. Without the safety of distance. On Tuesday, I stood outside the Birchwood Inn for 12 minutes. It was old, colonial style with green shutters and an overgrown garden out front. Room 8 was on the 2nd floor. The light was on. I nearly turned back twice. But then I went in. The room smelled like lavender and old linens. Laura sat in a chair by the window, her hands folded in her lap. She looked different, thinner, like the weight she carried had finally started to show. Neither of us moved at first. "I'm not here to ask for anything," she said. I nodded. She told the truth, how long it had gone on, how often she lied. No embellishments, no defenses. The divorce papers were already filed. The house was for sale. She wasn't asking for reconciliation, just responsibility. "I needed you to hear it from me," she said. "I didn't stop loving you. I just stopped being worthy of it." I said nothing. There wasn't much left to say. Only silence between people who had run out of ways to hurt each other. I took the papers. We said goodbye like strangers who remembered once being in love. Dylan's wedding came that spring. I wore a suit that didn't quite fit and smiled more than I felt. Laura was there too. We didn't speak. We nodded. After the ceremony, I met Clara, a friend of the bride, a writer who'd moved to Ashton Lake for the quiet. We talked about books, boats, and why people run from their own lives. Later, she asked me, "Are you still running?" I paused, then said no. Not anymore. That night, we stood by the lake, wind curling off the surface. It didn't feel like an ending. It felt like planting something new in soil that had finally been cleared. Some things don't get fixed. Some just get left behind. But sometimes, if you're lucky, you find a way to start again.